All right, guys, how do I sound? Actually, there's a little bit of a delay, so I'm going to have to wait a little bit. Isn't it time to start the stream? All right. So I got an email from a guy, Kojak's Gourmacules, Kojaks at gmail.com. Here, I'll go ahead and type that in the chat here. Kojaks.com. And, you know, he says this, says, I'm going to see to it that you never, ever get the chance to rebrand and be a functioning part of polite society. Good people have had their lives ruined over this thing. If your intention is to back away from this and start working against white rights and white identity, I'm going to make sure every employer you ever have will see your full archive of videos. You will feel the full brunt of the world you will be helping to create through your own incompetence. You will be branded a Nazi Ku Klux bigot, thought criminal until the very end. So at the very beginning here, like, this is the first error in all this crap. All right, it's not a rebranding, it's not optics, it's not real. This is all real. The problem with the fucking optics debate is that it's an optics debate. If you really are a Hitlerite, that will out. That will become apparent in time, right? Humans are good at spotting liars and like optics people. They'll spot it eventually. For nearly a year, on my videos, I'd inadvertently used a picture from an SS division as my background. I didn't know. I saw it on some forum picture, thought it looked nice, and copied it. And the thing is, that could have been like a gate. It could have been alt-hype Nazi gate. But it didn't go anywhere because guess what? Like, I'm not actually a Nazi, and that fact, like water, it's apparent in video after video after video. You know, when you just make casual side remarks, you know, people begin to figure it out. Like, it takes a while, but over time, people figure out if you're covering something up or if you're being genuine. And that's why, you know, you're never gonna go anywhere if you pretend, if you do like an optics thing. So what else Gourmacules says? He says, good people have had their lives ruined over this thing. Like, don't look at me. I never told anyone to go to a retard rally or to expose themselves or anything like that. That's all people like Richard Spencer and Chris Cantwell. Yeah, I was specifically telling people not to do the retard rallies. I have nothing to do with any of the garbage that you clowns did in real life. And to a large extent, a lot of the ideology itself, a lot of the Jew obsession stuff. If people, look at this. If people had followed my advice, almost nobody would have been doxxed, aside from like the content creators who are going to be doxxed by the Spurs, right? Almost nobody's going to be doxxed. Like, yes, people have had their lives ruined over this thing, and it's because they didn't listen to me, right? So to the extent that I had any impact, to the extent anyone listened to me, if anything, I prevented lives from being ruined by telling people not to do that shit. So the next part of this, if your intention is to back away from this and start working against white rights and white identity, like, this is, like, I don't know how representative this is of what people actually think. Now, my plan was to just make my previous video, which was super polite and super soft. I was so soft in that video. I did not let it all out. And then I was going to make that video, and then I was going to just move on to making videos about anti-white racism, debunking the Belgian Congo genocide myth, and a video then on biological Leninism. That was the plan, and I was going to do this and just sort of move on. But like, the antics of you people, not just from this guy, but from just like the spurging zoo in my comment section, has convinced me that maybe I just need to be more frank on this. Because you guys are losing your fucking mind over what is in reality, in effect, a very small change. He says, you will feel the brunt of the world you will be helping to create through your own incompetence. Like this is like a no-go zone for any white nationalist. You have zero grounds to attack anyone for incompetence. Just you will be branded a Nazi, Ku Klux bigot, thought criminal until the very end. Maybe, that's a possibility. There's another possibility. I'll have more credibility when I talk about white nationalism and who is and who isn't one, or maybe it'll be a mixture of both. Right? You don't know how, like people trying to predict how things are going to play out, and this very simplistic. They're going to call you a Nazi no matter what mentality. Like we've shown that to be wrong. Okay, like we've looked into polling data. The fact is, white supremacist has a worse polling rating than white nationalist, which has a worse polling rating than alt-right. Like the labels matter. What you call yourself matters. The fact that people like that's just so like they're just wrong, and people just sort of say that because they want to believe that. So, what else? Yeah, but then what else would they do? The traditional ways will never work. Is Chemnitz a retard rally? No. How are you going to expose anti-white racism when you no longer believe in white? Polling isn't physics. Also, would you ever be willing to speak at the Northwest Forum? Not really. I mean, there's nothing to really do much in the Northwest. I think the debate with space later in the week will be fruitless. It will be fruitless because what are we going to talk about? I guess we're going to talk about retard rallies. We're going to talk about the viability of white nationalists with three people that aren't white nationalists. JF is a Quebecois thing. Richard Spencer is who the fuck knows cares what, and I'm kind of a basically functionally a conservative at this point, but like an extreme one. Basically like a hardcore conservative is what I am right now. Like the most conservative you can be without being a full-on white nationalist. That's basically what I am at this point. So we're going to be talking about like white nationalism between three people that aren't white nationalists. That's going to be sort of, but whatever. And then that's one of the topics we're going to go into, and then we're going to talk about like tactics, and JF is going to tell us why there should have retard rallies, and it's anyway. The reason I don't want to do it, but the reason I'm going is because I kind of called Richard out, and I kind of like have to do this. That's really it. When you drop your positions from pure data, you eventually end up justifying status quo. That is actually not a stupid comment. And there's actually that's not entirely true, but there is some truth to that. Dubs Dubson. This is something, I forget who he was, but there's some guy who was talking about how in science, basically scientific advances are pushed forward by people who are kind of pig-headed and ignore refutation. And that's just the truth, because the status quo position will always have a lot more data behind it than anything that challenges the status quo. And if you just sort of quote unquote go with the data, 99.9% of the time, you're going to be just justifying the status quo. It's very rare that data organically just sort of emerges that undermines the status quo. To get data that undermines a status quo position, you basically need someone who's really pig-headed and keeps pushing and pushing and pushing until he eventually, does something. So that's actually a decent, a pretty good comment. Dubs Dubson. Would you be willing to release a thorough breakdown of your math on the contribution of Black Americans in taxes, the fiscal impact of Blacks and Hispanics? No. I mean, I gave sort of a breakdown, but like the thing is, you can just open the Excel files yourself. Awaken Saxon, great channel, great videos, but I'm not going to go through that again. Hungary isn't explicitly white nationalist, but they're pro-white. You don't need to be NatSoc to be pro-white. Exactly. And the thing is, conservatism. This is something I said in my videos, that, the conservative movement. Now, to the extent, you got a lot of people that are there's lots of variation, obviously, but I guess what we would call the real hardcore, I guess we could, I'll use the term Rush Limbaugh conservative. They're a default kind of white nationalist in the sense that, for example, Mormons are white nationalists. Now, of course, Mormons aren't white nationalists because you can be any religion and be a Mormon, but obviously in Mormonism there is a racial core, right? It's those people. It's a bunch of white people in Utah, right? It's sort of a racial core of Mormonism, and anyone else can sort of be a part of it. Same with Judaism. You sort of have a racial core of genetic Jews, however that's defined, Ashkenazim and other groups. Sort of, so you can have Jews by race, Jews by religion, and then there's also people, and there's also sort of Jewish traditions as well that are not strictly speaking religious, but they're kind of like things that Jews tend to do, right? And same with conservatism, you have the same thing. You sort of have an Anglo-American racial core, but anybody, just like there can be black Jews, there can be black conservatives. Not so many, but they exist. And there's an ideology around that, and there's like sort of traditions around that, right? So who is blackmailing you? Yeah, see, that's kind of a cope, and I guess I'll sort of get into that as like these copes that we have. Like, so this idea that I'm somehow being blackmailed or bought off. First off, I'm not. There's no evidence of this, and this is just obviously a cope. But second off, so basically, like, you have no evidence at the end. That should be the end of it. But second off, like, if you had Soros money, for example, and you wanted to really attack, like, quote unquote, the right, you would fund like TWP. That's what you do. You'd fund the clowns, right? You wouldn't fund somebody to become a Civnat, for example, right? You like, and let me just do it in reverse. Let's say one of you guys actually had Soros level money. Would you be like paying Antifa people to stop being Antifa people and become like, moderate shit libs? No, you want them to stay Antifa people because Antifa are ineffective, right? They suck, right? Now, just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean you're actually smart. And so there's a lot of rich people who I think are being stupid in funding Antifa organizations, and they're actually making themselves look bad in doing so. Like, just because they have money doesn't mean they're always going to do the right thing. But yeah, but if you're like on the right and you have a bunch of money, yeah, I'd fund Antifa because they make their side look like shit, right? Because they are shit. They're fucking terrorists. And you would do the other thing the other way. So if there's any blackmailing, it would be blackmailing to try to keep someone a spurg. Another cope that people will have is that I'm just massively black pilled, and this is like a weird statement, and it's like, I mean, imagine someone saying, "Oh, you don't believe multiculturalism can work because you're black pilled about multiculturalism." It's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm black pilled on multiculturalism. I don't think it can work. I'm black pilled on the idea that the Soviet Union's going to make a comeback. I really don't think that's going to happen. I'm black pilled on the idea that cassette tapes are going to make a comeback. And I'm black pilled on the idea that white nationalism could possibly work, or has, to whatever extent it would even mean anything, is true. So there you go. You could say that black pilled. Lol, his Twitter got deleted. Some Nazi apologist crashed his last stream. What? Jekyll, you're retarded. This, like, these videos came before. Like, I went on the Ralph retort, like, after my video. Like, you're dumb. How about softcore white nationalism, the sense of a state that prioritizes the native population while still giving some rights to other groups? That's, I don't believe in like two-tiered nationality. Either they're a citizen or not. I don't believe in different levels of citizenship. What is Enoch thinking about this? I don't know. I haven't talked to him. Are you having a nervous breakdown? That's like a cope. Right? This is basically people going, like, Ryan, I watched your videos for a while and I thought they were neat and I thought they were good. And I thought you were such a smart guy when you're telling me what I wanted to believe, but now that you're telling me what I don't want to believe, now I think you're stupid. Or it can't be that you're stupid because you weren't stupid before, but there has to be something going on. So frame games got to me, Kraut's blackmailing me, or someone's blackmailing me, or I'm just so massively blackpilled I'm having an emotional thing, or I'm having a nervous breakdown, right? Whatever. That's all this will sort of be. Would your Awaken Saxon, would your theoretical filter state have complete freedom of association? Yes. Is that going to be an explicit goal? It would be an explicit goal, but when people ask me, I'll say, yeah, I'm for freedom of association, because that's effectively white nationalist, if so, kind of. Blah, 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 blah. All kinds of students. Are you a paleo conservative now? I guess I'd have to, But the thing is, what does paleo conservative mean? I'm not, I'm sure there's a definition, but you'd have to do some research on that to figure out what that actually means. Striker is cringe fest. Your inclusion of non-whites opens the state for subversion by foreign governments. Maybe. I don't think so. I don't know why. The thing is, the people you're bringing in, these are people if you have what I'm talking about, the only you sort of have an area, and for your immigration policy, the only people you're going to bring in are people who are for example, Hispanics, but are really big fans of America, the Constitution. And there's a lot that are like that. It's just about 30% of them are like that, right? A non-negligible portion, okay, are really pro Merca, right? And they have no traitorous instincts on that. And even the Democrat Hispanics mostly don't. So I think that's a largely. I mean, obviously, any individual person can be bought off or be a traitor or something like that. But as a whole group, I don't think so. Do you think that for what is in essence white nationalism, Spencer's position is more required after all, as in he was more consistent now that you discard white nationalism? I don't understand the question. Dubs Dubson. So sorry, I have to move on. Can forms of European ethnic nationalism even work if a pan-European nationalism do not? Vinny S, they do. They can and they do. So you would want the U.S. to stay the way it is demographically speaking, but with reworked immigration laws. My view of the United States is that it needs to be broken up. I think the United States is FUBAR. So I'm not really thinking in terms of the United States, right? I'm thinking in kind of a hypothetical new country based on states that break apart from the U.S. That's really all I'm thinking in. And break apart from the U.S. doesn't necessarily mean form a completely new country, but it could, it's step by step, and it's complicated and it's messy, and it's not something that you can over plan for. But basically, you work at the state level to slowly wrest power from the federal government. You get blocks of states working together, and eventually, at some point, when you're strong enough, you just act. You just do, and you act in contradiction with the courts, with the Supreme Court, and then because the Supreme Court issues injunctions, says what you're doing is unconstitutional. For example, you start enforcing immigration policy for your block of states, for example, right? Obviously, the Supreme Court's going to strike that down, and then it becomes, okay, President, what are you going to do? Are you going to send the troops? So that's just sort of the game plans I have going on in my head there. But basically, the future has to be at sort of the state level and working at that level. WASPs get New England and other whites return to countries of their ancestors. I don't think that's viable. What about the Native Americans? Most hate Republicans, yet it's their native land. I support them having a sizable country chunked off into one area, or smaller patches throughout the U.S. I don't think they have a right to the whole of North America. I don't think their population or their development of the land constituted a right to the entire continent, but they certainly have a right to something. So, if I'm King Ryan and I'm deciding the partition from the top down, I'd give them, I'd give them like Washington and Oregon, except for Southern Oregon, which would go to the new conservative state, Southern Oregon, to give that new part of the country access to the coast. And so this Native American country would be basically in the Pacific Northwest. So they'd have plenty of coastline. They'd have a border with Canada, whatever. So that's how I would do that. This sounds like the same plan. Yeah. Well, if it's going to be a similar plan based on the political demographics, like, what would you propose for nationalists living in Europe? I don't have much advice on that because I don't know so much about that. I mean, if I was living in Europe, I would try to, and I'm not like a major activist. I'm just a person. I would learn Hungarian or Polish and move there. That's what I would do. And try to move there, try to meet the immigration requirements of those countries. When are you going UN? I don't know. United Nations? I don't know what that means. I'm against the United Nations, obviously. White Americans be pushed into identitarianism by anti-white race. If it's extreme enough, I think I basically think white nationalism could work if you could get if basically you could get every single white person and force them to sit through like 3 hours of presentation. I think you could do that. But since that's not happening, that's not happening. Which landscape return? They stole from each other. Yeah, basically just set up a Native American state and let them sort it out. If America is FUBAR, then Canada as well, perhaps. When are you going to go on a tour with Jordan Peterson promoting high IQ individualism? Do the numbers suggest that white nationalism isn't really possible, even if it's just conservative white nationalism? Is that what you're saying? Do the numbers suggest white nationalism isn't really possible, even if it's just conservative white nationalism? I'm not sure what you're saying on that. Does nationalism make sense in terms of an individual trying to strengthen the ties of the collective they're part of? It can or it can't. Anti-white racism is the reason why the alt-right exists in the first place. I think so. Your first worldism will lead to the domination of high IQ conservative Chinese. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think too many of them would immigrate to that country. Plus, they would have to meet other standards of psychology that not a huge proportion of them are going to meet. But I mean, China has a big population, so a lot of them. Okay, I have some more stuff that I want to say here. So one thing that I've been seeing in a lot of the comment section, this is a dumb quote, is that I cite a lot of polls and people, they're denying those polls, right? For example, I cite a poll from CNN. They go, CNN? Did you see how the CNN polls did in the 2016 election? Now, this comes from a misreading of what happened in 2016. In 2016, like, the truth is the polls were generally correct in 2016. Like, what actually happened, and I'm going to sort of like be like a prick here. What actually happened is that Sean and I found in 2016 that there was a huge increase in the Republican primary turnout, specifically in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. All right. And what the pollsters said then, and they still do to this day, I do not get why they say this. There's still to this day, they'll write articles saying that primary turnout doesn't matter. They still say this. I don't get it. Right. We just did a very basic very basic regression on this to show that primary turnout is really super fucking important. Okay. And we saw this, and we're looking at in the past, what we generally found is that a 1 standard deviation increase in primary turnout corresponded to a 0.4 standard deviation increase in general election turnout. And using that information, our model predicted Trump would win Ohio by 9, Pennsylvania by 1. Michigan was going to be a dead heat. And apparent for whatever reason, the info on Wisconsin was crap, and we didn't have a real prediction for Wisconsin. So that's what actually happened. And now the thing is, if I just went with my model, I would have predicted Michigan as a dead heat, as a true toss up. The day before the election, I would have predicted that if I faithfully reported my model. But even I was still a little bit, I just sort of had it in my head. It's like, yeah, my model says this, but it's fucking Michigan. Like it's like Michigan, So, but anyway, that's what actually happened. All right, there was a massive primary turnout increase, and institutional pollsters, where there wasn't a massive primary turnout increase, institutional pollsters generally got it right, and they got the popular vote right. And what white nationalists are doing here is they're taking a very specific error that happened in 2016 that had to do with what the conservative treehouse called the monster vote, which was this block of voters around Southern Ohio and West Virginia, and radiating out from there, these Midwest working class voters, that they had massive turnout, which was predicted by their massive primary turnout, and the pollsters didn't pick up on that. Right, that's what happened there. It was a very specific error by these pollsters. It's not a generalized inaccuracy of these pollsters. So for people saying, "Oh, polls don't matter because look what happened in the election," like that's a cope. That's wrong. That's a complete misreading of what actually happened. Funny enough, Fashion the Nation sort of asked me, because of our accuracy from 2016. They asked me and Sean to do something on predicting the midterms, and I had to tell them, was like, look, we don't have any secret sauce for the midterms. The reason we were so accurate in 2016 is because we picked up on one very specific thing, which was the massive increase in primary turnout in these states. And we predicted that was what was going to flip the election, and that's what flipped the election. So, so we don't have any secret sauce in terms of predicting the midterms, right? We don't have an in. If we were predicting the midterms, all we would be doing is looking at polling data and do like direct number crunches against institutional polling firms, and on that we would lose, right? Because they can crunch the numbers way better than we can, right? It's simple as that, right? So unless we have a gimmick, which we did in 2016, which was the primary turnout in the Midwest, we're going to be worse pollsters. So anyway, at this point, can't you just go full Milo and convert to Judaism and get a black boyfriend? I don't think I could get a black boyfriend. I just couldn't do it. What do you think about the claim that polls don't represent anything? It's just a way to influence public perception. I disagree. Are you familiar with HBD Chick? Thoughts on the Hanau line? The Hanau line is very much is something I talk about in my video on the European Revolution. White nationalism is about applying the same logic to ethnicities as you do to families. You need to protect people like you because doing so is the essence of life itself. Kind of. How did you come to understand that Richard Spencer didn't cuck Conte after believing he had? I just want to say on that, I don't think the evidence is enough to come to like a firm conclusion on that. Let me put it this way: I take the presumption of innocence very importantly, James, and not just in like a legal sense, but I think in a social sense, it's very because you can't have. Because let me put it this way: let's say you do 10 things, in a day. You go to the grocery store, you go to the bank, this, and the 10 things you do, like, it could be sort of like based on those 10 things you do, somebody could look at the 10 things you do and go, oh, are you a drug dealer? Because you were here at this time, and you're here at this time, and they could just sort of draw the dots to say, this is, there's only like, say, a 5% chance that you would do these things in this order, that you would go to the grocery store and then go to the mechanic and then do this and then do this, right? And this is a very precise order of doing things, and that's the hell of it. Like any order in which you do things is going to be a very specific order, and it's a very low chance of any one order of things that you do, right? The odds of you doing exactly what you do at any on any day is extremely low, right? For you to walk right instead of left, and then right again, and then left, and then right. If you add all those probabilities up, it becomes extremely unlikely for you to have done anything you have done on any specific day. Okay. And as a result, you can always say, oh, isn't it a coincidence that he did this, and then this, and then this, and then this in this precise order, right? And so you can sort of retcon anything and say correctly that it was extremely unlikely that he did these things in this order, and then use that as sort of circumstantial evidence that this person, you know, robbed a bank, right? Or it's like, what are the odds that a yellow Ferrari would drive by the bank? It's like, I don't know, but cars drive by banks all the times. So it's that sort of thing. And that's sort of why I take the presumption of innocence very seriously. Not just in a legal sense, but in like a real, like interpersonal social sense. So yeah, you did a complete 180, and it's just weird. I did not. I did not. Like okay. Here's sort of what happened on this. Like, how do I put this? Like a lot of people, what they're saying, like for example, there's this sort of meme, and I don't know if someone made a video attacking me or a podcast attacking me, or there's some forum posts where they're saying Ryan Falk is invalidating everything he said from the past 10 years. Now, first off, that's not true. But if it were true, it would be for the past 4 years. But the thing is, like, the actual arguments that I'm turning my back on are actually a very small proportion of what I've been saying. All the race realist stuff is still true. All the stuff about history is still true. With the exception of my belief that there was a monolithic white race in the United States. Okay. But see, that's just an error I made because I never investigated it. I just assumed it to be so. All of the stuff on white privilege, right, being bullshit, that's still true. On shit libs being motivated by thinly or not at all veiled anti-white race hatred, like none of this has been invalidated. Okay, what I actually invalidated was something that I said a lot in my videos and a lot of my articles, but people watching and reading never took seriously, which is fine because it's a very sort of idiosyncratic thing I was doing. And it's what I call thick hereditarianism or the genetic mesh. And I brought that up a bunch. And, and the truth is people didn't understand how central that was for my thinking, which is fine. Like I don't go around watching a bunch of people's content and reading their articles and really caring what's so super central to what makes them tick. I get that. And so people aren't going to take that so seriously regarding me. Like whatever, that's fine. But the thing is that's what was really important, right? And so back in the day, I came to conclude that traits were massively regressive and recursive through multiple generations. And it came from an expanded notion of heredity. Like take like a Native American child that is just like the typical white person in all ways, has an average IQ of 100, has an average white temperament, time preference, the whole psychological spectrum, right? Big five personality traits, et cetera, et cetera. My belief was that in the next generation of like this person would regress in IQ massively, and they would regress in all other psychological traits as well. Now, the regression to the mean in IQ, we know it's going to regress about halfway on average, simply because only about 50% of the variation in Western societies is additive, the rest being about 30% non-additive genetic effects, 20% environmental effects. And so that's why it's going to regress halfway, but only one generation. And this is on average, right? So when you ever get any exceptional person within a race, on average, you would predict them to regress half the way because IQ is basically variation is 50% additive, 30% non-additive genetic, 20% environmental. That's why that happens. So anyway, but then I said, in addition, all these personality traits that are impacted by your parents, for example, which IQ is not for the most part, all these personality traits, they're all going to be impacted by the genetics of your parents because how they treat their children is a result of their genetics, right? But their genetics is a function of your genetics, okay? Due to the genetic similarity that you have with your parents. Same with your friends. The people you live around will have a genetic similarity, you know, largely because you're around people of your own race. But more importantly, your friends will have relevant genetic similarity due to the correlation of socioeconomic status with personality traits. And people tend to choose to interact with people similar to them. And so the genetic influence on your personality traits will influence the people you interact with, thus reinforcing your personality traits. Right. And so I called all of this. And so you see, like, your genes affect your parents, affect your friends, which then affect you, so I called this the genetic mesh, and it wasn't wrong. Okay. And this isn't wrong, but the thing is, basically, the short story is I massively overestimated the importance of this. So let me distill my errors here. I overestimated the importance of the genetic mesh. I thought European ethnicities were more genetically similar than they actually are. And I believe there was some latent inherent white nationalism in all white people. And those three things are what caused me to embrace a kind of pan-European racial nationalism, right? So, but in the past 2 months, I sort of took a cold, hard look at these three things and came to realize that they're not true. So that's what has actually been invalidated is those three things. Now, for a large chunk of people watching, none of this matters because it was never, you know, this is all like really, I mean, this is all backstory regarding me, which, to a lot of people, none of that matters. For them, sometimes it was about Nazi, whatever. And, and so they're just going to say everything I ever said ever was wrong because of this, when in reality, just a few key concepts were wrong. Key concepts that were the specific reason why I was a white nationalist and not a, race realist civic nationalist. So, yeah. And it's bizarre. Like, there's all these comments on my videos saying some variation of, well, if you had reasons for being a white nationalist, then you weren't truly ever a white nationalist. You were just a white nationalist for those reasons. Right? That's now I'm phrasing that in a way to make it sound really stupid, really obviously stupid. But look, they'll say something to the extent of if you cared about white people just because of the traits of white people, well, then you never really cared about them, right? And it's just so fucking stupid. It's like, what am I supposed to? Okay, so I'm not supposed to care about the traits of them. Then what am I supposed to care about? You know, look, I like the way white people look when they're young and they're not fat, right? Aesthetically, but is that supposed to be the basis of some sort of worldview or something? Or is this just like pure gut tribalism? Like this is like prison mentality, prison gang mentality, wignat tribalism. So, yeah. Which specific European ethnic groups would you consider to be first worldist? It's obviously at NAM. It's obviously on a spectrum. My view is that Anglo Americans are the most. They have the highest concentration, more than English people that stayed in England, right? Basically, the American descendants of people from, southeast England, northern France, the Dunkirk, Picardy region, Flanders, and the Netherlands. That's basically it. That's what it is. So that's what I would predict. However, if you look at the actual data on people on Belgian Americans, they're shit. They're near the bottom in terms of like most voting Democrat and just being shitty in general. So that group, I guess, would be evidence against what I'm saying. But the other groups, the French, the English, and the Dutch Americans are generally like better, including in German Americans are actually generally better than the others. Obviously, there is inherent. Would you be okay with a base black guy marrying your daughter? No. No, I just wouldn't be. Are you turning away from the JQ? Uh, it's not important because there are ways you can basically make the argument. Look, here's something I've said. you have a general public that is massively skeptical of Hollywood and media, and especially the top levels of media. They're massively skeptical of big finance. They're skeptical of, you know, of the political party bosses, or the political establishment. Like, what more? What do you need? Like, why do you need to point out? Oh, by the way, all these things that you hate are like overwhelming, are like predominantly Jewish. Like, okay, like what does that get you? Like, they already hate this stuff. If anything, if you tell them all these things that you hate just so happen to be overwhelmingly Jewish, they might go, oh, maybe I'm a bad person. Maybe I'm like a Nazi for not liking, shitty bankers and, shitty paused Hollywood directors. Like, so there's, for me, like, there doesn't seem to be much of a point in pointing out, there doesn't seem to be a point in naming the Jew when, like, they already, like, it's basically they already hate these people without really even thinking of them as being Jews. It's kind of like, for example, Bill Kristol and like a lot of the neocons. Like, so many of the conservatives started to really hate the neocons, and just sort of the conservative rank and file, like average Joes, really hated the neocons. And like, it didn't really even dawn on them. It didn't really dawn on me back when I was like really hating these fucking neocons. It didn't really even dawn on me that they happened to be Jewish. Like, it didn't matter. It was just like, and so basically, like, people end up hating what a lot of, about 3/4 of Jews end up doing just by their own actions. And so you don't need to bring the fact that they're Jews into it at all. It's just, their deeds alone make themselves plain, and so you don't need to bring up the fact that they're Jews. Bro, you say people voting Democrat Party is shitty is just because they support open borders, or are actually concerned about certain economic policy. I'm generally more libertarian than the average person. I'm less libertarian than the average libertarian. So, I care about free market economics. But the thing is, economic policy doesn't matter within a certain range. Like, the range between Sweden and Switzerland doesn't really matter as long as you're kind of within there. So economic policy doesn't matter a whole lot in that regard. But, you don't want to be like North Korea, basically. Will you select the ethnocentrist or ethnomasochist non-whites in the values state? That's a good question, because, like, non-whites voting Republican, are they ethnomasochists? Generally speaking, I don't like, and again, this is actually something that needs to be studied, but the thing is, nobody's ever studied because nobody has a real need to study this. But something that sort of needs to be studied is, like, for example, Black Republicans, are they ethnomasochists, or are they just like, like, what are they are they like neurologically right wing or left wing? Right, that's sort of a question. I think they are what we would call neurologically right wing. It's just that they don't embrace, like, racial identity, right? They embrace the idea of Merca, right? They're basically Hispanics and Asians who have embraced Merca. A lot fewer blacks do so. And one of the reasons I think why is, to be quite frank, that blacks are visually, phenotypically, so much radically different than all other races, right? Like, black people look different. Black people are the most distinctive race in the United States. So you could say Australian Aborigines are even more so, but within the United States, they're the most distinctive looking. And so it'd be much harder for a black person who's like naturally like tribal or whatever to identify more with Merca than with their race. So that's why I think you have far fewer black Republicans, or one of the reasons you have far fewer black Republicans than Hispanic or Asian Republicans, simply because of what they look like. Have you ever bothered to read Kevin McDonald's Culture of Critique? I read it a long time ago, and it was anecdotal, but it was like probably 9 years ago when I read it. It's all been a Jew black pill psyop. More questions. Do you still believe there was a white race? Of course, there's a fucking white race. I'm not a race denier. If they're neurologically right wing, won't they support their own group rather than whites. That's a possibility, um, but generally they don't. So that's yeah. Like in the context of the United States today, they don't. At least, I mean, their children don't. You're talking about a regression. Their children don't in the context of the United States, and in a hypothetical new society, you would expect that regression to be even less. You and Sean highlighted the Protestant versus Catholic Orthodox divide and the Republican Democrat divide. Belgians being Catholic, for example. Why is this fault line not important? I never said it wasn't important. I just don't really talk about it that much. Seems highly unlikely that just two instances of the upper class replacing the lower class would have that much of an impact. It corresponded with a radical change in Europe. I think the impact, I think the proof is in the pudding regarding the importance of that. Would you change your views on racial nationalism if it does turn out that right wing minorities are ethnomasochistic? No, I would not. I mean, the thing, like, I just wouldn't because look, if there's, and maybe on for two reasons. One is practical, practically speaking, you need to have allies if you're going to win politically. But also, just on a very personal level, I would just feel like I can't. Maybe this is white empathy or whatever, but I would just feel like shits, telling them to go away. We agree on a number of key issues. I'm not looking for a debate, but I need some discussion. Are you open to this? I I don't. I'm going to be debating Spencer. I don't know. What did Richard Spencer do to you? He well, he shat the bed. He shat the bed for effect for white nationalism then, and now but he's also sort of shat the bed for conservatives. All type streams. I don't understand. I don't understand your answers. If minorities led in are ethnocentrists, they will support their own group instead of whites. But again, I'm telling you, Andrew Ryder, that doesn't happen in the United States. So, and you would expect it even less in this new sort of conservative ethno state. What about gender? You're gonna have to have 50-50 males and females. You know. Um, wait. When looking at whites political alignment, look at men and women who voted. How women. Yeah, I mean, women have always been like 10 points shittier than men. I think roughly throughout history. So, I mean, that's just the reality. I thought you were asking about immigration. Obviously, for immigration, you want to have an even sex ratio. So, the criteria for getting in a new country would have to be easier for women in order to get the same proportion of women. That's just the reality. Because you don't want gender population disparities. Do you agree with Jefferson's ideas on secession? Embarrassing. I don't know exactly what they are. I have a vague idea that he was pro secession, but so in that sense, I would vaguely agree. So anyway, I have like a few notes here and a few things I want to talk about. One thing that people like have always been saying, and this is something I guess I'm being kind of an asshole to say this, is when people say, Ryan, by by not being a white nationalist, you're cucking. And and I think this is amazing because I've just think about it here. Don't reject this here, but think about this, that there are probably no bigger cucks than white nationalists. Okay? Like they care about a mythical white race, not the real white race, but a mythical white race. And when the real white race hates them, and the real white race will go back and forth between wanting them dead or not. That's sort of how white people actually think of white nationalists today. And you have this white race, and she like whores herself around to all foreign peoples around the globe, right? And you have these white nationalists who are saying, "Oh, this isn't the real you." That's what I see. I see like this giant woman and this little man. This little man is going, "Don't pour yourself out to these foreigners. This isn't really you. You're really faithful and you love me." Um, and like how white shit lives, like they care and they advocate and they vote and they signal for all these poor brown people. And these poor brown people, and this is a white nationalist talking point, and it's a good one. Much of the time, not only do these poor brown people not give them any props for it, but these poor brown people, they'll feel entitled to white support, white shitlib support, and they'll demand more from white shitlibs to compensate for their privilege. And, we call that cucking. But the thing is, a far greater proportion of blacks and Asians and Hispanics appreciate what white shitlibs do and are actually like a little bit grateful to white shitlibs, whereas whites do not appreciate to anywhere near the same degree what white nationalists are doing. Whites overwhelmingly hate white nationalists, and brown people in firm majority appreciate what white shitlibs do. Now, this stuff, like, there's a lot of stuff, and this is something white nationalists will pick up, is like the progressive stack, or Ramsey Paul called it the Church of No Salvation, and that's true to an extent, but that's like the really hardcore crazies of the left, right? The rank and file left, the rank and file like Hispanic and Asian, maybe not so much the blacks, but like the Hispanics and Asians are actually like really grateful to white shitlibs, in their perception, helping them out. Okay. But like, whereas white nationalists, their relation to the greater white population is nowhere near as reciprocated. So if you want to call like a white shitlib being a cuck to the brown people, well, then whites are like super turbo cucks regarding their relation to the greater white population. So yeah. What's another thing people have talked? Oh, quitting. This is the other weird thing. Like, you have these white nationalists who say that I have been quitting or whatever, and it's like, it's sort of like we have this place that we need to go. Like, we need to get to the top of the mountain, and you have a bunch of people who had this sort of ideology that they could just sort of flap their arms and fly to the top of the mountain. I think Rothbard used something like this example, and they're all saying, and then like someone comes to the conclusion, well, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can flap your arms to fly to the top of the mountain. I think you have to actually climb it. I don't think humans can flap their arms and fly up. And then you have these people saying, well, you're just quitting. You're just a quitter. Like, no, to actually get to the top of the mountain, you actually have to climb it, right? And so that's sort of like white nationalism is kind of an escapist fantasy, right? It's not how things actually are, okay? Because, like, for example, like Judaism, it's sort of a race, it's sort of a religion, and it's sort of an ethnicity. And this is something that's a little bit controversial, and people might give me a little grief for saying this, but same with like I would call it hardcore conservatism. It works the same way. It's sort of a religion / ideology. It's sort of a race with like an Anglo-American core, and then race people around them, like with the Jews. And then but it's also kind of an ethnicity, right? There's certain things that like conservatives do, Conservatives tend to have more traditional Christmases and family gatherings. There's also some things about traditional conservatives that I don't like, which is lawns. I'm not a fan of lawns and invest and constantly working on lawns, but whatever. So, and the thing is, I mean, and so when you're a white nationalist it's like basically what you get to do is you get to sit on the sidelines and snipe and say, what cucks, and mock conservative political failures, and oftentimes conservative legitimate refusal to fight back. Obviously not everything that the white nationalists have been saying is wrong in that regard, but the truth is, like, people like Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh have been saying the same sort of things that white nationalists have been saying in terms of like, you fuckers in DC, you got to fight, right? Don't cross the aisle, don't no, you got to get in there and fight. This is a kind of total war, right? And that sort of total war mentality, Breitbart had it, Tucker Carlson had it, Sean Hannity is starting to get it, okay, and Rush Limbaugh certainly had it. So, and white nationalists had this idea as well. But the thing is, it's not an exclusive white nationalist idea. And so but they sort of sit on the sidelines, okay. Um, but but then to think about it is like, okay, when the rubber actually hits the road, what have been white nationalist candidates? What have they done? Okay, and they have been, now the thing is, they have been, not only have they been electoral failures, which is whatever. Like, I'm not gonna, like, the thing is, Paul Nealon was gonna lose. Like, nobody thought he was gonna win. Maybe Ann Coulter thought, I don't know. But and Patrick Little and David Duke in Louisiana. Like, the thing is, nobody, like, these guys weren't expected to win, and I'm not like they lost their failures. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that you had Doxson Paul Nealon, okay, and then you had Patrick Little going on about having farms full of Jews, to keep them around so that they can be tortured over several generations. And you had David Duke just being David Duke. And so, but then you had Ann Coulter go to Wisconsin to endorse Paul Nealon, and then Nealon kind of spits in her face by spiraling off on Gab about the Jews in a way that normal people don't understand. They just look at that and they think this guy's just crazy going on about the Jews, okay. And so the thing is, like, and so all these criticisms that white nationalists have of conservatives, they're just totally hollow when you look at their either non-participation in politics, or to the extent they've had any participation in politics, it's been an embarrassment. Not just losses. Like, the losses, that's fine. They were expected to lose, whatever. That's fine. But the fact is, like, getting sane people to run for political office who can keep their shit locked down is difficult. It's really hard, okay? And this is sort of another thing. If you spend an extended amount of time on the internet just talking for a long time, eventually you're going to stay, you're going to say stuff that can be snipped and then memed. And if, like, for example, if you have, say, 1,000 hours of content, someone can very easily find 1 full hour of dumb things that you're saying and make an hour-long presentation of just all the dumb things that you've said, and make you look really bad, right? And they can make it even longer if they decide to deceptively edit. And if they deceptively edit, then they can have, like, almost an infinite amount of apparently stupid content. So so it's hard, right? It's really hard. And so I think a lot of white nationalists, by not having actually participated in the political process, didn't realize just how hard it is to avoid that kind of smearing. So yeah, but the thing is, like, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. The thing is, white nationalism has no real political force. This is true. This is done. This is established. Don't argue that at this point. So what's the point of pushing it? Well, I guess maybe to feel good about yourself and mentally escape into fantasy land. All right. So it's escapist. So like, again, it's like a guy who's says, well, I think I can flap my wings and get to the top of the mountain. Oh, you have lost the faith in flapping your wings to get to the mountain? You're a quitter. You're quitting. Just as we were winning. Oh, that's another line that I'm getting is, oh, you're cucking out. First off, like, cucking out, like white nationalists calling others cucking out. Just as we were winning. It's like, well, no, you weren't winning. If you've looked at polling data, oh man, Ryan, looking at the data. If you look at the polling data, no, you're not winning. You're losing, and you're losing bad. Okay? The border wall went from being a popular, non-partisanly supported issue to one that is now a partisan issue tied to Trump that the majority of whites probably don't even support. And the majority of non-whites definitely don't support. Right? It went from this thing that everyone supported to thing that now not many people support. Okay? People are in favor of amnesty. Okay? The number of people who think that racism is a big issue in the United States and needs to be battled has like more than tripled in the past 8 years. like it's been a disaster. And so what I think is happening is that there's a lot of people on the alt right, if that even means anything anymore, or people who are like white nationalists or by any other name. What I think they see is they see stuff happening. It's like, wow, lots of stuff is happening. I guess we're making headway. It's like, no, there was a little riot in Chemnitz. Okay, there's a riot in Chemnitz. Like that's all that happened. It's not happening. Okay. So okay, I guess I'm being blackmailed. All right, I'm looking at the chat again. It is bitterness. I know exactly when he got pissy. Spencer said something like, "We can't just rely on race realism" in an interview. Ever since then, well, first off, like nobody ever says we can't just rely on race realism, like Pravada, and I didn't even see that interview. Like so again, this is just dumb people making like dumb people connections. So, so again, I'm looking at the chat again. What about the Faustian spirit? That's not a real thing. I don't care. It's not a real thing. In the if the French also went through their genetical replacement thing, why did their liberalism lead to the reign of terror? Uh, like in all these countries, like my view, first off, it's not the French. It's the people from the Picardy region, who I'm talking about from the North Sea region that's ground zero of the European Revolution. So France itself is not, as on the whole, is not ground zero. And West Germany would be more closer to the epicenter of the European Revolution than East Germany. Interestingly enough. Now, here's another thing. And this is something I speculated previously, was that the more quote unquote first world people might actually be more shitlib than otherwise. But I've come to the conclusion that that's not the case, at least not in terms of genetic tendency. Because basically Anglos and German Americans are have better political views than Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans in the United States. Now, one thing that's complicated, for example, in Germany, according to with the Hanau line and the European Revolution and the genetic change, you would expect West Germans to have better political views than East Germans, right? But they don't. But there's an obvious environmental explanation there, which is East Germany was under the Soviet Union, right? And so they were shielded from a lot of the pause. So, and that's sort of why I think Eastern Europe is Eastern Europeans are generally more level-headed about most things, is because they lived under communism instead of, Western media, let's say, with certain people at the top of it. You don't have a Twitter. How do people contact you? Go to Facebook. Just unsubscribed. Good riddance. Do you believe in the European soul and value it? Kind of. I mean, I value the soul of, if you want to say the European soul, I would say that there's, a smaller proportion of Asians and Indios who possess more of a quintessentially European soul than a Wignat, So, yeah. Why wouldn't you want your daughter impregnated by a nice black boy? I just wouldn't. It's visceral. Using party ID in the U.S. as a proxy for ethnocentrism is misleading. I don't. It's not misleading. It's crude and it's shitty, but I think it's the best. It's the best thing we have. So, Irish and Italians were hostile to civil rights, even though they voted Democrat. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. You can find all this stuff, but we're talking about today, and today I don't think that's the case. Like for example, I mean, you could say the same thing about like the South in general. Like they voted Democrat. I mean, that's like we know what that was. Do you discount in-group preference and the threat it poses toward whites? I don't know exactly what you're saying, man, logic, life, but I think you're saying in group preference of other groups. I mean, could threaten whites. Yeah, it could. So, your data shows Norwegian Americans are one of the lowest earning immigrant producers, finding the highest GDP per capita in Europe. Why is that? Um, I mean, it could be lots of things. It could just be immigration selection. I mean, Norway today, again, it's hard to tell how much of that is a result of the offshore oil. But I know that even before having the offshore oil, they're one of the wealthiest European countries, and that may be a result of them not having had brain drain. That for whatever reason, less successful Norwegians tended to migrate to the Americas. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Thoughts on NRX? Not don't know because I don't know exact quite much what they are. Thoughts on the Quiverful movement? Big fan. Big fan. If they can actually get people to have kids, I'm a big fan. Why would you want to spend time sorting out the talented tenths when you can hang a sign excluding by race? Uh, First off, you say spend time. It wouldn't be that much time. It's not near as much time as you think. When I explain the, and also it's not the talented necessarily the talented tenths. It's people who are going to be reliable to our ideology and aren't going to be like anti-white and all that stuff. So it's not like this isn't IQ nationalism, right? It's sort of like a loyalty towards, I guess, for lack of a better term, the hardcore conservative ethnicity. Maybe we need to make that clear and have a better name for that because it obviously exists. It's obviously a real thing. It's just not specified. But you don't want to. But you do want to spend time sorting out people, based on their traits and not just by race, for two reasons. One, white nationalism is DOA. You're not actually going to do that. It's not actually going to go anywhere. One, and two, I don't like being a piece of shit and telling people no. Sure, you think like us, and you are a big fan of European civilization, and you're on our side regarding the anti-white racism, but you're brown, so you have to live in New Brazil, right? You have to live in the Republic of California. Like, I don't know, that just seems really shitty to me. I'm pretty sure that he's been threatened into switching sides. Switching sides. But like that's so bizarre. It's like now I'm on like I don't know. It's almost like you're saying that I'm on like I'm some hardcore like anti-white nationalist now. Like I'm not. I mean, look, obviously I have some opinions here. Okay, I think white nationalism is kind of shitty, but it's not like, you know, I'm not like a shitlib who's going to go like, "Oh yeah, we really need to stamp out the scourge of white nationalism. It's a real threatening thing." It's like no, it's just not threatening at all. Okay. Now, some of them individually might be threatening me personally because I'm a traitor or whatever, but as a movement, it's not threatening. So, white people are very good at running. White people are better at running than I think white people think, especially in middle distances. Um, I genuinely think there might be, I thought about this when the Poles set a indoor 4x4 track and field record, and I was looking at that and I was sort of wondering, it's like if a country like Poland, I think Poland has like 45 million people. Okay, well, how many white people are in the United States? It's like 200 million. Why wouldn't a population of 200 million whites be able to have a 4x4 team that would be even better than the Polish 4x4 team and set another world record out of U.S. whites? And that got me into thinking. I think there may be a substantial cultural thing going on. Right? That sounds very weird for me. It's not a very important thing because it's sports ball. Who cares? But I think there might actually be a cultural effect that's causing an underutilization of white athletes in the United States. I don't think it would matter so much for the 100-meter dash. I think blacks are so advantaged in that I don't think whites can ever really compete in the 100-meter dash. But the 400 meter definitely, and the 800 meter definitely. 200 meter, I think that's still too short for whites to be able to compete with blacks. But I think the 4 and the 8, whites may actually should be beating blacks. I mean, that's a possibility. I haven't really, looked into that deeply, but I have sort of a hunch that whites may actually be better than blacks at the 400 meter on like sort of a genetic level. Certainly the 800 meter, but that's even if you don't believe that a white ethnostate can be established in the U.S., can you not at least see whites in the present demographic organizing to protect themselves? Sure, sure, and that's what that actually happens within the Democrat Party. They talk. You have all these little ethnic organizations acting in the interest of their ethnic groups within the, aegis of the Democrat Party and liberal or whatever, and that's you know a I mean, that's a-okay to do with with white people regarding a general conservative agency, and it's already happening, right? You got Trump. Trump named the white on South Africa, right? And that's good, and that's a very powerful thing, and that's a very powerful weapon, and it's a weapon that I'm going to use more going forward. Is talking about anti-white racism. That's something that I'm really going to focus on, and I'm really going to keep on calling that out and pointing that out. And I think it's one of the most effective things that we have. Ryan could disassociate from the alt right without any big drama. However, he chose these petty attacks and incoherent arguments. Well, they're not incoherent arguments, but whatever. I mean, if you're listening to me up to this point and you're still saying they're incoherent arguments, then that's just what you're going to believe. But the thing is, I'm responding to have a good day. The thing is, I have like it has to be bloody a little bit. Like it can't like I can't just, for example, get a Twitter, which well, obviously I'm never going to get a Twitter because they banned me, and I'm not allowed onto the platform again. So obviously I'm never going to get a Twitter. Someone else may get a Twitter, and they may happen to sign up for Twitter with a burner phone and happen to tweet in a way that is similar to me and post all of my videos on their Twitter, right? But obviously that's not going to be me. But for example, I couldn't just make a Twitter post and say, "Yeah, I'm not a white nationalist and I'm done with the alt right. Bye bye." Like that's not going to cut it. Have a good day. I have some explaining to do, right? So Japanese nationalism is DOA. What? No, Japanese nationalism is not DOA. No, Japanese that's so stupid. LOL, the comment was about not literally running. Oh, I'm sorry. What would your opinion about infiltrating the banking system and major firms within the states? If you can control the flow of money, you can control the narrative. Sure. Easier to infiltrate a lot of those things when you have governorships. So, and basically, and here's another interesting thing. For example, to win the governorship of Wyoming, you probably only need about 60,000 votes in the Republican primary in Wyoming, and you only have to worry about winning the primary. The general election is not a contest. Republicans outnumber Democrats at least 3-1 in Wyoming. So, like, Wyoming is a state that, like, a real, like, hardcore conservative, seriously conservative movement could actually take over. I don't think a white nationalist could win the Republican primary in Wyoming, but a hardcore, like a hardcore conservative, I guess that's what the label I'm using. The term I'm using now. Would you rather live in a 100% white state or 95 white based black man state? That's a tough one. Like, we're not actually talking about that though, because like in sort of like the political tendency filter state, you're not going to get that many blacks. You're going to get more Asians and Hispanics. But yeah, that's a tough one, Perennial Cookie. You mentioned Jews earlier. Are base conservative Jews? You have to say yes. You have to say yes on that. Yeah, like on Jews being allowed into the movement. Um, I'm personally fine with them, and I know that like I was talking to certain people, and they said that they actually when I actually explain, because the problem is like people, there's a lot of spurging going on, and so people aren't actually listening to what I'm actually saying, and so they think I've like I don't know, maybe they think I've become a shit lib or something. Uh, but but I was talking to one guy, and he said that he was fine with what I was saying, with the exception of Jews. No Jews, period. That you could have base. That he was fine with base black guys. He was fine with base Hispanics, but no Jews, period. And from my point of view, I mean, on two ground. First off, you have to say yes to Jews if you. I mean, just if I can't convince him on, you know, on the fact that you should allow Jews that are on our side into the country. If I can't convince him on that, at least the practicality is you have to. You don't have a choice. If you exclude Jews, your movement's done. So, do you care if the country is 80% brown if they believe in the Constitution? Look, obviously I care. Like obviously I care. Obviously I'm white. I prefer there to be more people like me, to be around people like me, people in charge. Even if you got brown people who share all of my political views and all my civilizational views, the way they act personally is different and alien. You know, like black conservatives, they still behave blackly. And so obviously I prefer to live around white people than brown people. I think basically all white people are like that, except for like Wiggers. Should we encourage mass immigration from poor white countries to bleach the U.S.? I don't know, because first generation immigrants to the U.S. or white immigrants to the U.S. vote Democrat, and those groups when they come to the U.S., my guess is they're going to vote Democrat, so they would make things worse. The Balkans prove nationalism is natural in the whites and not racial nationalism. Why do you say that whites aren't naturally ethnocentrists when they were until a few decades ago? It's not that they're not naturally ethnocentrists; it's that they're not naturally like white pan-European. They never were really at any point in history, with one exception, and that is in relation to blacks. Whites will develop sort of a pure racial identity when they have extended contact with black people, but that's the only race for which that's true. In the southern United States, all of the racial, European ethnic differences went away because the blacks were so like they are. And in South Africa, you had a deep hatred as a result of circumstance between the Boers and the English. But even that kind of a legendary hatred between the Boers and the English went away over time when the threat of black rule became more and more. So it's that. So, but anyway, to answer your question, Andrew Ryder, um, they're not. Aside from their reaction to blacks, whites were nationalistic. They were French, they were English, they were German, but they weren't pan-European. Okay. Now, this is not to say that you're happy with having your daughter marry a black man as long as the black man happens to be French. Like obviously that's not true. Obviously there's still some racial feeling on some level, but it's not at the level of pan-Europeanism. So a base Jew would be as I'm a Zionist. Mike Enoch's a Zionist. I mean, whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean we support everything Israel does, but it's like, but yeah, base Jew would be a Zionist and probably go to Israel, and that's fine. Would you have a segregated state where base blacks can live separately than whites? Yeah, I support the rights of free association, and seriously, but What I would do though is I would say that it would have to be sort of at a county level. Um, Basically, the county has to decide: is this going to be an integrated county or a racially exclusive county, or any other kind of exclusive? It could be a religiously exclusive county. But the thing is, that county has to decide, and it has to be like a really overwhelming majority. It would have to be something like we'd have to sort of study the issue and figure out what the real number, what the correct number would be. But maybe 80%. If 80% of the people in the county vote for that county to be a Mormon exclusive county or a white exclusive county, then you could do that. But as for white only stores and stuff, um, that would be that would basically be, how do I put it this way? It would have to do with, is this a utility? Like, for example, a diner, you could probably get away with a diner discriminating racially because there's other diners they can go to. But if you're the only diner in town, then I would say no. And it's basically about access. Like the power company can't cut off power to you because they're the only game in town, right? Same with the phone company and all that stuff. So that's basically the issue. And so a company or a store can be racially exclusive so long as there are other stores, similar stores within sort of the area. Right? That's how I would say that. And of course, a county could be completely, or maybe a lower level, maybe a lower level municipality could be racially exclusive if certain criteria were met. That's how I would uh, do that. Isn't white nationalism just an alliance of ethno-national sentiments? Not in the U.S. In the U.S., it's pan-European. Ethnic nationalism is growing faster than any other ideology. Your argument is total shite. Your crazy new ideology is going nowhere. Well, it's already. I don't know if you want to measure like the effectiveness of the ideology. It's already way beyond ethnic nationalism, and ethnic nationalism in the U.S. is going to be getting creamed. Um, in Europe, maybe your argument is better. I don't know. I haven't looked at those polls, but in the U.S., you're getting creamed. What's your thoughts on Neanderthal nationalism? How about a vanguard? Your answer to my last question didn't make any sense. It just showed white people are ethnocentric on an even more granular level. Okay, they're not pan-European, dummy. Racial discrimination should only be allowed when dealing with non-essential goods. Basically. You're a liberalist now. I don't know. Does Sargon support the? I don't know. Does Sargon support a sort of a genetic filter for immigration and the right for racial segregation within the state? Why do you think the USA will break up? It hasn't, despite what Thom. I don't care what Thom Shidham predicted, and for it to break up, you have to have people actually doing stuff. Um, are British ethnic nationalists? What? Does this mean that Sargon is unironically smarter than the alt right, given that he has adopted a nationalist in sheep's clothing position? Sargon is definitely smarter than the alt right in general. Like, I mean, you have to have a certain amount of intelligence to survive and create a YouTube channel that big. That's my point. If white nationalism stands no chance, this genetic filter idea of yours is even less likely to succeed. No, no, like because it's working within the idea of conservatives in the United States, which is a huge thing. A huge. I don't know if you live in the United States, Eric Johansson, but conservatism in the U.S. is like super popular, right? It's like it's the second most popular thing in the United States, and polls have shown that. somewhere between 25% and 30% of people in each state wants their state to secede from the union. So I mean, it's like not like no, it's so conservatism is massively popular. Secession is massively popular, compared to the alt right. So like no, like you're just like that's totally wrong. Like conservative separation has a much more likely chance to succeed than white nationalism. And the stuff about immigration, that's stuff you do after the fact. That's stuff you do later. You don't upfront, promote your state with the idea of, oh yeah, we're gonna filter immigrants through, disgust response, bleak response, and facial structure, right? Because the masses don't understand why that works. They don't get that, right? So that's you're not going to put that up front as a selling point when you're dealing with when you're selling this to the masses. I'm just explaining that here because one thing you have to deal with a new state is immigration policy and how you're going to do it, and it's those kinds of things are how you would do it. I have no love for the other groups that make up the alt right. I just love the facts. So while I agree with you in disliking Spencer and WN groups, I can't welcome non-whites. Well, would you have supported repealing the 65 Immigration Act? Yes. I don't see the benefit of conservatism when you remove white interests. Conservatism is white interests are massively uh, promoted by like real conservatism. We can have a multiracial state as long as you can have prayer and school. Okay, like getting a state and closing the border would massively help whites. Shield wife. Why does ethnic nationalism have to be pan-European? You still haven't explained this. Andrew Ryder, I'm talking about the United States. I'm not talking about. I'm. There's no English nationalism in the United States. Okay, that's not a real thing. Okay, so that I mean that's why white nationalism is why pan-European white nationalism. And that's conservatism. Have you thought about the second and third generation immigrants will vote? Yeah, yes. We actually looked into that. That was the regression to the mean and the heritability political views stuff that we looked into in the video. So literally conservative nationalism and separatism. Correct, with a few more, I guess you could say, more robust varnishes. Do you now abandon the notion of anti-white conditioning? Uh, like no, obviously it exists, but it's like I don't know. What are you what are you gonna do with that? Like, are you gonna uncondition every single white person, or are you gonna uncondition enough white people to get white nationalism? I mean, what is the future for the North Sea race? HAPA mixing. I my view is that, let me put it this way. Copetiswado or whatever. The white people in the U.S. are the least likely to race mix. They're less likely to race mix than Asians or Hispanics or Native Americans or even Jews. And I also know, sort of from anecdotes, that the Irish and the Italians were most likely to, back in the day, they're most likely to marry blacks. So I have a suspicion that I guess we could call it the North Sea race, that they are just intrinsically least likely to mix out. Um, just for whatever reason, they're just less likely to mix out than um, Europeans further away from that, and certainly other races. Just rewatch your video, "The Primacy of Race." What would you change about it? Because honestly, that flipped me from libertarian to white nationalist. I'd have to rewatch it and remember what I said, frankly. But I think there was something in there about, oh, there was some stuff in there. Yeah, there was some stuff in there about how blacks who have what we call conservative views don't vote Republican. Yeah, that's true. But the thing is, when I'm talking about a separate country, that doesn't necessarily matter because the idea is that you're not going to bring in those blacks who have conservative views but vote Democrat, for example, right? That's that would be the thing. So, I mean, it's certainly like think of it as like a country. It's basically whites who take their own side and brown people who take the side of European civilization. That's what it is. And so, in a sense, like race still, there's clearly a lot of race stuff going on, right? There's clearly a core race and peripheral races, but you know, um, so there is maybe today instead of the primacy of race, I would call it the maybe the centrality of race instead or something, or the really importance but not total the really importance but not total primacy of race would be my position now. Yeah. All right. Um, is white nationalism a waste of time? Yes. Connecting your political position with a certain genetic strand is subjective, kind of. Couldn't a communist claim Jews to be first world strand for their great involvement in communism? Yeah, don't be. Yeah, we're not letting in communist Jews. Dutch are uber North Sea and race mix a lot. I don't know. I don't know if they do or not. I have to see data on that. Why do you think the blacks overwhelmingly vote Democrat? That's because because they have racial identity. I'm forgetting that the North Sea race are losing their homelands. I'm not forgetting that, buddy. Like I don't know. All right. What do you think of general American nationalism around Trump similar to the alt-right? Um well that's general American nationalism around Trump is not similar to the alt-right. Like alt-right it's alt-right is complicated because at one point it was much bigger, but now it just means white nationalism. So alt-right and white nationalism have now become interchangeable. So yeah. So American nationalism around Trump, very good. Do thumbs up to that. Do you disavow Papa JF? No. My family moved to the US to be around white people. Okay. Did you watch did you watch Dumentio's comment in your vid? No. Can I be part of your Rainbow Reich? Yes. What was the stuff about Anglo Americans being the master race, but then accepting blacks and Latinos that can't have too much Anglo blood in them? I don't know, I guess it's sort of like that. I mean, technically, it's a proposition state. If you have the right values, then it's fine. But yeah, I guess it could sort of function like that. Is European ethno nationalism a waste of time? Not necessarily. I mean, certainly it's not a waste of time in Eastern Europe, but it might be a waste of time in Germany. Why do you think other races have racial identity and whites don't? They don't have as much pure racial identity as you might think. Much of their for them to really even be that important. Wait, what? Back? Hello? Can you hear me?